So either tomorrow or maybe today, you're going to end up seeing part 2 of my interview with Dan Black of Landland, where we get into the business model, economics, client side of their poster studio. But one thing that came up after that interview in conversation with Dan that I think is really relevant to what we're working on right now is the contrast between what Dan does with the poster studio versus working in the kind of traditional version of the design world where you deal with creative directors or you deal with clients that have these really specific communications needs. In that, part of the reason that working in agencies and whatnot can be so frustrating is you have all these layers of people, and each layer of people assumes that everyone else's job is easier than it is. This is why account people push deadlines so hard instead of pushing back on the client. And then someone else asks for a change without thinking about it, and somebody else assumes that you can start working on a project without relevant information. So a lot of times when you work in agencies or in complicated environments, there's a lot of ambiguity that doesn't need to be happening, but it comes from the fact that everyone's in a rush and no one wants to go make yet another phone call. A lot of due diligence is not done, let's say, and that leads to all this frustration. It leads to these kind of endless rounds of revision and kind of constantly fixing things at the last minute. If you look at Dan's model, how he works with someone, it is a breeze compared to that. You get an email, an inquiry, you email back, you find out the artist's kind of do's and don'ts list of stuff that they do not want to see in their posters. You get the copy, and you already know the size. And from there, other than potentially creative disagreement, but the other thing is that the client sends over JPEGs of the stuff they've seen in your work that they like. And then from there, you make this thing that has none of the ambiguity of the kind of typical stuff you have to deal with clients. The copy is not changing. The size is not changing. There's none of this. And furthermore, whatever you design or create only has to work for one single format. So when you hear this interview, you hear about the economic side of it, and Dan and Jess and probably most poster artists really have to hustle to make it work, and they have to figure out how to leverage the creative the intellectual property that they create in making a poster. They have to figure out how to extract that and use that in other places to sort of justify the fact that 60 hours might go into something that has an unbelievably nominal fee. But the flip side of that is you never have to go to a meeting. How incredible is that? And the reason that I bring this up is the whole point of really thinking about pricing, the whole point of articulating methodologies and matching them to context and to potential client needs, all of that is about not wanting to repeat the experiences that I had working in agencies or working in-house in corporations, and not wanting to torture myself to take a big, giant design process and attempt to condense it down for an 11 by 17 flyer. Instead, to do something totally different for that 11 by 17 flyer. I'm thinking about this a lot lately, this idea of so much of the stuff that sucks about being a graphic designer, or that can suck, comes from these situations that we don't control, that don't jive with us. Because this isn't true for everybody. Some people don't care about the ambiguity. Though on the other hand, if you oversee your project from start to finish, you're going to care about ambiguity. If you hand that shit off to someone else and let it be their headache, you're not going to care so much. So a thing I kind of urge people to do is to really think about what stuff is bugging you and how could it be done differently, and then can you be the person to do it differently, and what would it take to do it. So for Dan and Jess, it involves a lot of drawing, a lot of hustling, a lot of figuring out how to repurpose something, and a lot of traveling to like trade shows and conventions to sell posters, network, meet friends, make new friends from your fans and whatnot. But then if you never want to sit in a meeting again, like what would it take to do that? And like what changes could you make? Because one of the whole things is like, there's not much point in going into creative industries to be miserable. Why not just do something stupid that is more stable and easier and reserve your creative energy? And at the same time, you know, what's that saying where people are like, or I work for myself and my boss is an asshole? You know, there's not a lot of point in building something just again to be miserable, and potentially make less money than you would make in another environment where you'd also be miserable, but at least you'd have less stresses. So those are some things to think about. There are things that I'm thinking about a lot as we move forward, situations that I want to fix and I want to stop dealing with. So thanks a lot for watching. As always, look out for the second part of the Landland interview. I think it's incredibly frank, which is cool. And take it easy.